Yes, we are starting. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the Symposium of Visual Arts Circle. It's Friday, 5:13 p.m. GMT, the 27th of April 2018. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Valeria Benevolo Franca, the head of teacher development at Cultura Inglesa in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, a past president of Braz TESOL, and an interviewer and member of the Visual Arts Circle. Over to you, Valeria.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, Oksana. Thank you, Heike, as well, and Rob. I'm very happy to be here. And I think what we're going to do a little bit today is go over a couple of activities which we can do looking at images. And I think the idea was to actually think about how we look at things. Or rather the way we choose to look at images and pictures, because it can be a very personal experience, and that is actually the beauty of it, because we see things in a different way, and because we see things differently, it means that we can bring to the classroom a very rich dialogue and rich collaboration possibilities. So I'm going to sort of pretend that at this moment some of you are participants and collaborators in this process, and we're going to work through a couple of activities which you can try out in your own classroom. Okay, so I'm going to try and move to the next slide. I'm not sure if you know this book, Seeing Things. I'm not very good at pronouncing names, by Joel Meyerowitz. And it's actually a book for children, and he takes children through the photographs of very famous photographers. He divides it up into different chapters and themes, and he conducts the child through an observation of the images, and helps us to create our own thoughts about the images, but there is a sort of guidance. And it's a very good way of showing children how to look at images. And so what I did was to borrow some of the themes in the material and bring it up into our own perspective of ELT. One of the things he says in his introduction is that the way we look will be different, and it's meaningful only to you, yourself. And I think that's a very important thing, because we don't see things the same way, even though it's the same image. And I think that's really, really important element. And another thing he says, which is, I think, really interesting, is that when you see something, it's a moment of waking up. And I think this is a really good idea, especially in the world in which we live today. The power of an image can be much stronger, because we do have a chance to stop a bit, focus on an image, and think about it. Because sometimes in our day-to-day lives, we are unable to do this. And so images actually have this strong possibility for us, and I think that's really valuable for us. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to begin doing a few things together, and I count on your support using the text chat. Okay, so we're going to do a first activity together. And I'd like you to look at this picture here. And I have 3 questions, but we'll stagger the questions. So first of all, who do you think this is in this picture? You can just type your own thoughts in the text chat. Who do you think this person might be? Okay, Rob. Rob referring to a very delicate political situation happening in Brazil right now. What made you think of that, Rob? Okay, right, that's nice. Uh-huh. Okay, because of the type of hands, okay. Uh-huh, a giant, right, okay. So we begin getting quite different reactions to the same picture. My next question is there a dream? And when do you think this dream is going to, or if it's going to come true? What is the dream? When is this dream going to come true, and what is the dream? Okay. Right. So Heike, housing. What made you think of housing, and in what context, and what else? I'm going to actually ask a lot of questions. Oh, I like that, Nick. House-minded giant. Yes. Seeking freedom. Yes, that's true, Heike. That's right. Exactly. A link between the slums, the favelas, and kites. Kite flying is a very, very common activity amongst children here in Brazil, particularly so in the favelas and the slums. Exactly. So we can already begin seeing by the answers that you're providing that this picture is already beginning to, or this, it is a photo of a graffiti on a wall, is already drawing out a number of different ideas and hypotheses. Okay? And all of these are so different that they will lead to completely different types of conversation amongst students as they reach a consensus about what this photo means, or perhaps they don't reach a consensus. They will keep their own vision. The fact is, because of the image, we're able to explore topics which normally we don't, or normally we don't see it. So there is a lot of graffiti in the walls here in Rio, in a number of areas in the city. But it's not often that we stop and actually look at the graffiti. In fact, in São Paulo recently, the mayor decided that this type of graffiti was not good graffiti, and he painted over all of the graffiti in the town. And it was a very shocking thing to do. But in Rio, thank God, this hasn't happened. And graffiti is a way of expressing feelings and sentiments by people who live in the community roundabout. So the ideas you've already given are very rich. It's the notion of becoming free, of what housing means, of what it means to live in a poorer community, the importance of what does it mean to be the head of something, what does it mean to fly a kite. We use the word freedom. So so many ideas emerge from one picture, and it directs us obviously towards a theme of social justice or social injustice, and how we can talk about it. But it's not imposed by anyone, it's how you interpret the photo, and I think this is the really important point which comes back to the beginning of Joel's book. Okay? So this is a good start. We're going to go on to our second photo now, okay, and a different point of view here. If I manage, yes. Okay, so the theme here is shadows of ourselves. A shadow will always accompany us. But as we grow older, we forget about shadows. How many of you remember as children playing with your shadow or playing with shadows? Good. Is this something which is very strong in the child's world? Exactly. Oh, fantastic. Shadow puppetry and shadow theatre. It's a fantastic art form. Beautiful art form, in fact. Kieran has a comment here, playing with my own shadows with brothers and sisters. Exactly. Shadows sort of take us to our childhood. And those of us who are lucky enough to still have that child in us will also always be looking at shadows. But what I want to do here with this picture is slightly different, okay? Just have a look at the picture and think to yourself what the context might be, okay? And once you've done that, I'd like you to think, how do the shadows feel? And you can type that out in the text chat. Yes, that's a lovely idea about not escaping it if you love sunshine. We get a lot of sunshine here, so I suppose we get a lot of shadows. Oh, yes, okay, Heike, that is wonderful. They can get hurt by the car. It's as if they're being run over by the car. Okay, well, yes, the shadows are waiting for a bus which doesn't seem to be anywhere close. Right, okay, the shadow on the left is completely isolated. Exactly, okay, lovely. Yes, Nick, our bodies are just shadows of ourselves in other dimensions. Wow, okay. By looking at shadows or in a photograph or an image, apart from allowing us to create narratives, it also allows us to actually look at ourselves as if it were a mirror image, which is something we sometimes find very difficult to do. It is a great way of touching on the theme of empathy. Because it is a likeness of ourselves, we can bring out that element of how whatever is happening, how people feel or how the shadows feel, and we can touch on topics which might be difficult to touch on sometimes. It all depends as well on the photograph you have. People say nowadays, that we are obsessed with clicking photos and that photography has lost its art form because of this. I see it slightly differently. I see it as an opportunity for all of us developing an alternative set of language skills through photography. And for us in the classroom as well, it allows us to delve deeper into a humanistic side of things, which sometimes is so difficult. Because we select the photos we want to bring in and our students can select the photos, it adds that element of personalization and an opportunity to touch on things we want to touch on, which sometimes we find difficult. So this idea of looking at shadows is very important and is one of the points which the author highlights, how we can look at shadows and what we can do. So I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it and drawing out language work with students. Okay, we're going to go on. I'm not quite sure how long I still have, but let's move on. And this is another picture here. And here I want you to begin thinking of narratives. And one other thing is, when we have a picture, we don't have to see everything to create a narrative. And what we have is a snapshot of something that was happening. So I want you now to create the narrative of this story. If something puzzles you in this picture, can it be part of this narrative? So what is this narrative? Have a quick think, and then just a very brief outline of this narrative. Okay, hi Keith. Trailer was abandoned. Okay. I don't know. There's a lot of background noise here in the room next door to me, so please bear with me. This task is slightly more complex because we do have to think a little bit more, so I understand we won't get a full-blown narrative here, but some ideas. Okay, so we have an accident here. The truck caught fire. Okay, passing by on the right lane. Okay, so the man is there. Is it the road is blocked? Indeed, it is. There is an abandoned trailer. Or maybe he's directing people. With an image like this, because it's not 100% clear, because we could look at it and see different things, it allows for a lot of meaning negotiation amongst the students if they're looking at it as a group. And this is incredibly important. It's during activities in group work where students are forced to solve a problem which is slightly beyond their level. They begin pushing their language production forward. So they experiment with new language. They experiment with concepts they want to express, but they might not have the lexical sets to be able to express themselves. But because they're working in groups trying to solve that problem or solve that puzzle, they will collaborate, they will help each other, and they will push each other further on. So they're creating a sort of scaffolding for the learning experience. Students which have more language, more knowledge, helping each other so that they construct or build up the idea they want to express. So sometimes we need activities in which the images are slightly more complex. They will lead to tasks which are slightly more cognitively demanding. Okay? So the beauty of something like this is that it allows this type of interaction among students. Okay? Obviously, there are different ideas, and it would take time to create the narrative. And then actually hearing the different narratives in a sort of task-based approach, and then jotting these narratives down and then going back to work on the language can be a very, very rich learning experience for students coming out of the image. I'll show you a last one because I'm very much aware of time. And this one actually the theme doesn't come from the book. The theme actually came from a colleague. He actually is a biology teacher, but he teaches extracurricular classes on photography with students. Matsumoto here in Brazil. He does a lot of talks. He's a Google innovator, and he does a lot of talks teaching teachers to use Google Photos and so on with students. And in his group in school, the kids chose the theme, and they chose the theme of invisibility. And they decided to focus on the theme via people who were in the streets, homeless people, and who had dogs. And that was their theme. And then the idea of the work actually went forward, and they actually produced interviews, and they moved on to from a descriptive project, which was a photography project in which they were exploring language, into a socially active project. And it's very interesting how things can move from one thing to the other if we as teachers are open enough to it. But this is a photo of a typical scene here in Brazil, you know, beneath bridges and highways, people living in very difficult conditions. And we pass by this every day. So these people are indeed invisible to all of us. Now a photo makes them visible. And that makes us think with something I'm going to link at the end, you know. Do photographs tell the truth or not? What truths are told via photographs? Can photographs make people visible? These are questions which I think we can approach with our students as well. Complex, difficult issues, but important ones as well. Okay? So these are the themes I thought were interesting in the book. I'm going to go on to the last example now, which is actually a little sequence of things we can do with images. And I don't know how many of you know of the golden record. This was done in the 70s, led by Carl Sagan, in which they created this golden record with the images and sounds and music representing humanity. And in terms of images, they selected 115 images. And I've always found it really fascinating what these images were, remembering that it was done in the 70s, and how they were selected. So we're going to do an activity now which is slightly inverse. We're going to be thinking of images, but without looking at the images. So I'm going to show you, on the NASA site, you can see the full list of all of the images which were included as part of the 115 images. We can't see all of the photos, okay, because not all of them are have copyright, are copyright free, so, but we can see the list. So these are some of the ideas, some of the images which were represented. Just have a read through that list, if you could. And as you read the list, we can see that there are images which are taken by famous photographers, and there are images taken by people who worked with Carl Sagan and so on. What strikes you about some of these images without seeing them? Okay, there's a great deal of diversity, and there are 115 images. So, exactly. Everyday images as well. Just waiting for people to type in. It's a positive image of mankind, yep. Exactly, verbs, that's right, exactly. I hadn't thought of that. Well, maybe in this section, but Alfie, there are women represented, indeed there are. It's just, I just highlighted this section, but there are women highlighted. There might be much more to humanity. Okay. But when we look at this idea here, house, New England, house interior with artist and fire. When I say house to you, are your images of houses the same or are they different? I think that's an obvious question. I would imagine that our images of houses, our mental images of houses are quite different. There will be an element of similarity, but it all depends where we come from. Okay? Right, so house for you, in that case, immediately draws a connection with home, where we belong, or where we come from, at least. Okay? So this is interesting because the same description of an image conjures up different mental images for each of us. Okay? Okay, that's right. So this is rich in itself because how do we define things and how do we see things? Our mental images of a certain object is completely different. So we can start with that discussion, or we could actually start from the image itself. Obviously, we don't have all of the images, but these are some of the images which were shown on the golden record. And so I know it's a bit small, but it gives you a glimpse of the type of things which were selected. When I said there were women, we can immediately see women in this one. But it is very much a selection linked to the time in which this project was done, the 70s. Which begs the question then, if NASA were to do another launch and they were to create another golden record or whatever, what image would you add? I asked a couple of colleagues and I had suggestions such as a picnic, a bee, a flower, diverse family units. What would you choose as your object? What would you choose to represent the world if you were to select an image? Wow, okay, Facebook. So I think the point Heike is making here, each of the contributors, they could only choose one image, okay? So how do you actually narrow that down? So working with students, you can immediately see how rich this can be as an activity in itself, either beginning with just the description of the image and then actually looking at images and then asking them to select their own images, because it is not an easy task. So that takes us back to the point which is, there is only so many images you can choose. So can we actually judge the people who selected the images for the images which were selected? It's such a subjective issue, okay? And that's when it becomes interesting and we can do loads of things with this in class. This is actually a project I did with students a number of years ago. And I linked it to this work which was done, and this was back in 1998. Peter Greenway, who's a film director, but he also does art installations. He created a prop opera based on the idea of the golden record. So he selected his 100 objects. He is a person who loves lists, loves listing things, and so he created this opera based on the 100 objects. And one of the images he chose to, or object he chose to represent humanity was a window, which I think is actually quite interesting. And this in itself, if we talked about this with students, this would actually lead to so many different projects and possibilities to be done with students, just from the simple image of a window, okay, which has so many meanings today. Okay? Yes, it sounds the old time capsule project, exactly the same type of thing, exactly. Which we did, you know, sort of time capsule or bottle thrown into the water, etc. Okay? So I think these are variations on a theme, but which we can take on. Finally, because I think my time is up, I'd just like you to read through this quotation from David Hockney's book, A Bigger Picture. This is a book in which he and an interviewer question each other about art and what art means to him and his relationship with art and photography as well. And I'd like you, oh, Madalena, that's lovely. You've got to tell me more about that afterwards. I'd love to know about this. Okay? I'd love to find out about that, so we'll talk. Okay. So how do you react to this? Based on how you use photography with students and images in class, and how do you react to this quote? Okay, that's okay, Alfie. Exactly. It's each person's own point of view. Exactly. It's that moment, that snapshot. Okay. Obviously, when Hoda probably talked about this, we're talking about the beginnings of photography, and perhaps the same type of fear artists might have had at that time, which we today have when we hear, you know, robots are going to substitute teachers. I wonder what artists at that time felt when they saw photography coming into their field. You know, how did they feel about it? Probably the same thing. So that might explain Hoda's comment. I think it's important for us to reflect. And as teachers, there are so many ways we can actually go about using the image and photographs to promote a way of seeing things which will be different, but it generates reflection, generates collaboration, and ultimately generates language and the possibility of linguistic development for our students. So I think this is what I wanted to say. I think I've managed to keep to my time, which is good. And right, if there are any questions, feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to share the presentation and anything else with you. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. It's been lovely to be with all of you.